This is a deep dive into Indiana Jones: The Great Circle from the Xbox official podcast. The official podcast. This has always weirded me out. Like, this is the corporate podcast that they do. It's kind of implied that it's more casual and chill, but it's basically one big commercial. So I just want you to be aware of that while we go through this. This is not like an independent podcast as far as I'm aware. This is the official Xbox podcast. So it's, as I said earlier, it's like those Disney ones Jenny Nicholson talked about in her Star Wars hotel review thing. It's like the big official Disney one. So they're not going to reveal anything potentially concerning. This is basically a hype piece, but I want to hear while they talk to some devs if they mention anything new or unexpected. Let's see what they say.
Hello and welcome to the official Xbox podcast. I am Joe Screbbles, editor-in-chief of Xbox Wire, and I am incredibly excited to say that we are here to talk Indiana Jones and the Great Circle. You have probably already seen that there is a near 15-minute deep dive into the game, going through things like story, combat, puzzles, and a lot more ahead of its December 9th launch. And with that video covering a lot of topics, I wanted to take that deep dive and dive even deeper into it. And that is why we have got Axel and Jens from Machine Games who have joined us. Thank you very much for taking the time. I know it must be incredibly busy for you right now.
A bit, but it's a pleasure to be here and be, having the opportunity to talk with you about it.
Oh, well, we're going to talk a lot about it.
Bring it on. I love these types of interviews. I typically wish that they would be more willing to open it up more, because as I said in the preamble to this on stream, it feels like a lot of gaming journalists nowadays, they're not really journalists. They write descriptively, if you know what I mean. Like, they write and they describe games purely descriptively, where they're not being critical or critically evaluating stuff. They're just describing what they see. So they play something like Star Wars Outlaws and they go through a level and they're like, I went through the level and I stealthily took out 5 guards, and then I looted this room. I took a thing out after using Nyx to open the door that was locked because Nyx climbed in a window. And then I got the thing I needed and I snuck back out using some moving crates that pivoted around the level. And then I jumped off and I escaped on my speeder bike. Okay, that was a descriptive piece, right? A critical journalist or somebody that's like evaluating it and reporting on it could be like, yeah, I did all that. And I noticed that the guards were behaving in very dumb ways. I could take out a guard standing right next to another guard. And even though they definitely should have heard the takedown, they didn't. And I was able to then take them down immediately too, because their AI was so poor. That stood out to us. That's not mentioned in the descriptive piece, but it is mentioned in like the evaluative piece and the piece that's offering kind of an editorialization of their experience. And I feel like a lot of games journalism is about the descriptive writing, where they don't want to take a clear stance. They don't want to describe anything clearly. They don't want to critique anything or look at it more critically. They just want you to describe what it is, and whether that's done to preserve access, as some people suggest, where it's like it's all about access journalism. They don't want to upset the big corporation that's going to invite them to the event, so they just refuse to really critique it. Or if it's because they just don't want to deal with the blowback from the fanboys who would freak out if you did that. Like the videos I did leading up to Starfield, like where I was saying, hey, it doesn't make any sense where we will have a spaceship, but we can't fly it on planet surfaces. So we're going to land in like little bitty fish bowls. Is that what we're doing? Like, how is that exciting? Where they're going to generate a few points of interest, then we hit a invisible wall and we have to go back out. Like, I don't understand how this is that impressive. This seems like it's not the fluid experience that's being pitched. People freaked out about it. As I said earlier, they mass downvoted videos, and after the game came out, people kind of saw what I was talking about. We're like, oh, okay. We get it now. But there's none of that critical evaluation or discussion about games from these big outlets. Like, nobody's doing that type of thing, which I think is why those videos resonated with a lot of people, because it's just something that nobody's really doing. Instead, you get pieces that are indistinguishable from this, which is like an official corporate sponsored podcast. And it's indistinguishable from like coverage that you'll see on big sites like IGN or GameSpot. And I think that that's the big problem people have with gaming journalists, is that they're not trying to be journalists. They're just trying to glaze something or just be purely descriptive so they can't get blowback from anybody and they upset nobody. And I just find it like really frustrating because when there's red flags, you'd think that they would call them out, but they just conveniently look over them.
So I have been lucky enough to play 2 hours of this game already, which has been incredible. But for a lot of people, this deep dive might be their first really extended look at how this game fits together and all the various moving pieces that are there. So before we kick it off, I'd love you to give a sort of top line summary of this game and the various elements of it that people are going to get their hands on very soon.
Yeah, absolutely. So Indiana Jones and the Great Circle, it is a first-person cinematic adventure action game, and it's developed here in Sweden by...
That just raised like so many red flags for me. Did you hear what he said? IGN 3 weeks ago. Epic adventure action.
The last truly great Indiana Jones movie came out 35 years ago. Since then, pop culture's most famous archaeologists' last 2 big screen outings have been flops. In fact, Indy's best work since The Last Crusade has come in video game form. 1992's LucasArts point-and-click adventure classic The Fate of Atlantis, The Collective's excellent third-person action adventure The Emperor's Tomb on PS2 and original Xbox in 2003.
Here.
Circle showed me, among playing Indiana Jones and the Great Circle showed me, among other things, is that it's more of an adventure action game rather than the typical action adventure game.
I feel like he's framing this as like his realization when it seems like this is the marketing term that they're using for the game.
Cinematic adventure action game.
Because the standard phrasing is action adventure. That just, it hits my ear weird. I don't know. It hits my ear weird. I think if it is that they're marketing it as adventure action, and that's how they're marketing it, and he's like, that's how they phrased it to me at the event, and that makes sense to me, that's fine. But in that preview, it sounds like he's saying, I've realized it's an adventure action game, when it sounds like that's the marketing bullet point from Xbox that's just being echoed.
And it's developed here in Sweden by Machine Games in close collaboration with Lucasfilm Games. And the game is set in between the events of Raiders of the Lost Ark and The Last Crusade. And one of the main missions with the game and the purpose and kind of one of the driving force behind it has been to make sure that we put the player into Indiana Jones' shoes. We really, really want you to feel like Indiana Jones. So with every whip crack, with every shot fired from your revolver, and with every punch to an enemy face, we really want you to feel like Indiana Jones.
And it really does. And I think you'll get a real sense of that as we go through. So kicking off this video, we start with this cutscene that seems to lead us into an action segment that looks to be just kind of a moment after a puzzle has been solved. So can you tell us where we are here and how we've got to this place?
Well, I don't want to spoil too much. Like, there's some sand going on around here, so maybe you can figure out that this is sort of the more deserty part. But this is a very special moment in the game. It's one of those places where Indy finds himself in these kinds of ancient places. And I love this part of him, like, turning away as he destroys this really ancient artifact for whatever reason. There's a lot of going on here that makes sense as you play through the story, but it's one of those really indie moments in the game that kicks off this series of events that are very
Sorry, I just realized I was blocking him that whole time. I'm a professional streamer, if you can't tell. Yeah, Detective Steven strikes again. I mean, it's all about framing, right? Like, and if the approach is maybe it's just parallel thinking, like this is just how he's describing the game as adventure action, and then the Ryan McCaffrey, he approached it as adventure action. He's like, oh, that makes sense. Could just be parallel thinking. But whenever I'm like, it seems like we're just glazing the corporation that gave us access to the preview, and then it's framed as though you've realized the game is like this, when that's like the big marketing term that they're pushing is adventure action, not action adventure. even though it's a very unique and very specific flip of the term and the normal colloquial way it's used, it just hits my ear weird, and it makes me wonder if it was more of like the marketing inspiration than anything else. I'm starting to feel like this is just one big 25-minute. I mean, I had a feeling it was a big 25-minute commercial, but that's basically all it's been so far. I'll speed it up a little bit.
This is a good example when it comes to the type of environments and which type of settings that you can, be expected to come across throughout the entire game experience. Mysterious places that get your brains spinning and your the cogwheels ticking. Like, what is this? What happened here? And most of all, how do I get out of this mess that I now ended up in? So it's a good example on some of the very spectacular events that you will find yourself in the game.
And we will often talk about this game as being adventure first and everything. And this particular scene is interesting because, it's adventure, but at the same time, we have these action elements that are so important for Indiana Jones. Setting up this trap that gets the adrenaline going.
I think,
again, the doubling down on adventure first, action second. Very interesting. Interesting. Make of that what you will. I do think they are pivoting off of action first because it sounds like this game is much more stealth oriented in the gameplay. That's what all the previews have stated. But it's like that's fine, but I think when people think action, or when they think Indiana Jones, they think action adventure. They think like big, crazy set pieces, interesting, unique environments. When I think of it, I of course think of the boulder rolling after Indy. I think of the plane while the guy, is standing there, and we all know what happens with the propeller when it hits the dude. Like, those are the things I think of when I think of Indiana Jones, and I don't really think of carefully crouching behind boxes and working around enemies. It just doesn't. It's not what I would expect. The video title should just be like how cool our game is. Well, it's just, I'm going to give them a little bit more time, but I'm starting to feel like they're going over the same trailer we've already seen, and it's just going to be more like I mean, it's fine to promote your game. That's fine. My problem is with it being pitched as like a deep dive into this in a podcast form, when it's just kind of like
interesting,
hype it
as
up.
you say, like so many games have that idea of like, this is a puzzle section, this is an action section. That feels like such a seamless segue from clearly a puzzle has been solved, and then we're into this moment of action out of nowhere, and that kind of unexpected element, which does feel more like cinematic, because you wouldn't have chapter headings that said this is now a puzzle. So yeah, I think that's it's a really nice way of kind of showing that off. Here we see Marshall College. This is a hallmark of a classic Indiana Jones story, but this is a very specific point in the timeline, as you said. So we have a lot of very traditional ideas about Indy, but who's this Indy? Are there specific things about this point of time for the character that are defining him in your game?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I think there are two ways that you can answer this, or like there are two portions to the answer that at least I can try to cover a bit. One of them is that we portray the Indiana Jones as the world gets to see him basically for the first time, as he gets presented to the world in Raiders of the Lost Ark. That's where we've been looking most heavily in terms of reference and inspiration, to try to capture that version of the beloved character. He's a very human. He's teacher. He's at the same time, he's also kind of a superhero, but maybe not with superpowers. But this kind of action man. And at the same time, there's this great warmth and depth with him as a character. And all of those components and character traits is what we've been trying to portray and push forward. And that's like one part of the answer. We wanted to experience that. But on the other hand, we also have, obviously we're making a game, we're not making a movie. So we have player agency and we have the freedom of choice. So you want to make sure that the Indiana Jones that you will experience as a player is the Indiana Jones you want to experience, right? So if you prefer to be more towards stealth, or if you want to go more brawling and fighting with your bare knuckles more, or even pull out the revolver a little bit more from time to time, that's perfectly fine, because that's what we want to make sure that you as a player experience, your own Indiana Jones experience.
It is the kind of...
I mean, it's stealth or brawling. This gameplay has always hit my eye weird. Is that a term? Like, these guys are about shooting, but this is kind of what I mean with the AI. Where Indy is standing alone. He just whipped that guy. The weapon drops. This guy now sees Indy. You would think he's like, oh God, he's coming for me next. And he would start shooting. But he just kind of like stands and pivots. And same with this, like Indy just beat this guy up. 1, 2, 3, 4 guys. There's another behind him. They're all just kind of standing there Yeah, see back there. And they're just gonna like try to punch him. They all are wearing revolvers. They all have, or not revolvers. I forget the name of the pistol, but they all have pistols. Like, why are they like, okay, dangerous man, we'll slap him? It just doesn't make sense. It feels like one of these games that you're gonna have to kind of turn your brain off in order to get through. Like, that's kind of what I'm expecting. Oh, I'm muted.
The length of the puzzles, how long are the stealth? Obviously been a lot of work making sure that we get the balance right in between, how much gunplay should there be, how the length of the puzzles, how long are the stealth sections, or, when we do allow for certain type of game mechanics, and getting that kind of balance right has obviously been a lot of tweaking and hard work from everyone within the team.
In terms of coming to the game itself, we just saw a section of the Vatican, which was a section of the game I got to play a few weeks ago. And something really occurred to me while I was playing, which is, despite being linear in inverted commas, it felt very open.
What did he call them? Is that a term? Do people say that?
Despite being linear in inverted commas,
Inverted commas instead of quotation marks? Is that a thing? Is that just like a British thing? I have never in my life heard somebody call them inverted commas. That's a thing? Yeah, it is. Dude, English, you got to get your act together. Like, you British folks, you got to get your stuff together. I mean, I felt bad about the whole revolution for a little bit, but now I'm starting to think maybe we were right. First the T and now this. Unbelievable.
It felt very open to how I wanted to get to that objective in a way that I really wasn't expecting. So was the design idea here, you're kind of giving people a place to get to, but giving them the freedom to get there in the way they want to?
Absolutely. And as you say, like there's a wide range of, from strictly linear roller coaster rides to these very open sections. Exploration is really important, even in the most linear sections of the game. It's something we want to reward the player with all the time, and we've designed the game around that because he is an explorer as a character, and we like that in terms of game design as well. So it's important.
And it also ties in, very tightly with one of the core focuses that we had was to make sure, that's why we're talking that this is an adventure action and not an action adventure. If you're start to dissect the aspect of adventure, what is that? Obviously a big part of adventure is exploration, getting the sensation that you are actually uncovering and discovering secrets and hidden gems throughout the entirety of the experience. So there's a lot of win-win with that setup.
Yeah,
I love hearing Swedish people speak English because like some of the consonants they pronounce differently. Like instead of hidden gems, it's hidden gems. It's just, it makes me smile. I don't know
that's
why.
the thing. I felt almost like naughty for not doing it the way it wanted me to. I was like, well, I'm just going to try climbing up these battlements and jumping onto a zip line instead of fighting all these guys, and it worked. And I was like, well, that is really nice. We're seeing a lot of puzzles here. One thing that I'd love to ask is, how do you design a video game puzzle that feels right for Indiana Jones? Like, what is that? What is the vibe that you have to capture while still making it an interesting thing to play?
It's something we had to figure out throughout the development. It's puzzles is actually something that Machine Games and the team as a whole has not too much experience with. So figuring out what that was for this game, that was an interesting journey. And where we ended up with is a really broad variety of what puzzles are. Doing puzzles in a big game that's trying to be both challenging and accessible at the same time is a challenge, right? How do we make sure the players don't get stuck? So we had to work out puzzles that could be challenging. At the same time, we need to make sure there's a way for players who doesn't necessarily want to, fiddle and think and all that kind of stuff. So
Oh God, here we go. We want to find a way. So if players don't want to think, they don't have to worry about that kind of stuff. Dude, we were just talking in the last stream on Friday. We were just talking about Avowed, where was it Destin who tried it? Destin was mentioning like the excessive hints that companions give, where it's like you walk into a space and immediately, oh, there's a treasure up there on that upper level. We should go outside and climb up. It's like, okay, you solved the problem. Or Atreus in God of War, where you walk into the level and he's like, maybe we shoot arrows up there, freeze it, and the water will fall. It's like, okay, you just spoiled the whole puzzle. Cool. Like there's this weird thing in the industry in the last like 5-6 years where every single damn AAA game assumes players are brain dead and have no critical thinking skills. And it drives me crazy because games like Elden Ring show the complete opposite. Players can think critically, players can solve puzzles, players can find creative ways to solve problems or to create builds and stuff if you let them and kind of push them into that. And guess what? If they can't figure it out, they'll Google it. Problem solved. Easy peasy. But there's this big push for, I think they frame it as like accessibility, but there are solutions that exist. And this is one where in the attempt to create the solution, you're creating a new problem, you know, where you're dumbing down the game so much to make it playable by the lowest common denominator of like people who want to, in their words, think about puzzles. You're trying to make it playable for those who just can't think or don't want to. And in turn, it makes the game extremely oversimplified and stupid for everybody that's above that does want to think. When I'm doing a puzzle, I'm like, if it's a puzzle, make me think. Otherwise, it's not a puzzle. It's just tedium. You know, like we have these, did I bring them in? Like I have all these 3D printed puzzles, okay? For the D&D campaigns that I run, every once in a while, if there's like an interesting little puzzle or if I have a really cool piece of treasure or something for the party, I'll give them one of these and I'm like, real world, you've got to solve it. None of this rolling to solve a puzzle crap, okay? You're going to actually solve it. And it's one of those things where like, I don't want you to tell me how to solve it, how to build this into a cube. I want to figure it out. I want to work on it. I want to figure it out. And it will be all the more rewarding when I do, because I will have earned it, you know? That's how it works. I will have actually earned it by thinking and solving it that way. Booyah. Beautiful. I didn't need hints. I thought about it and I solved it. Boom. That's what puzzles are. Otherwise, it's just tedium. If you're like, okay, now there's 3 crates. You can stack them. And you need to get up on that ledge. How do you do it? Well, I'm going to make 1 crate and then I'm going to stack 2 on top and it's going to be like stairs going up to it. Damn, they solved it. It's like, that's not a puzzle. That's just a roadblock. And that's not, I don't find that engaging. So anyway, this is, I don't know if this is a selling point or the selling point they think it is, but having a robust hint system built in is really important. Hopefully there's a toggle at the very least.
Doesn't necessarily want to, fiddle and think and all that kind of stuff. So having a really robust hint system built into it as well was really important. So a lot of effort and work has gone into getting all those components to gel.
Yeah, obviously we see puzzles and traps in the movies, right? And most of the time that's like pulling a lever or stepping on the pressure plate and something gets triggered. But when you start to expand on that and making a video game out of it, like what is actually leading up to that? Or what happens if that lever is broken and you need to find, another part to make it work? And I think one of the beauty that has happened throughout the entire puzzle work with the puzzle team and the designers is that the puzzle has almost got their own life. It's like an entity within the game and it spreads out. It's not only you going into a room. It's like, oh my God, here's a wall with some cogs and I need to solve it. Yes, sometimes we have those scenarios also, but sometimes the puzzle just expands so much more and you need to, run some distances to find clues or collect things to put you in a position to solve it. And I think that's why some of the more larger puzzles that we have now in game is very rewarding because it puts you on a path and it forces you to platform around and actually dissect the environment and use your head.
If it actually does that, I will be happy. But I fear this is going to be one of those games where it's like, I mean, we've all played them, where it's like, okay, we have our level. And this is the door you have to get through. But it has 3 slots for you to put something in. And the items are located around the map for you to collect. And they're all guarded by guards. So you have to go in the level and stealth around all over the place to collect them, bring them back, and then run over here, collect this one, stealth all the way back. And it's going to take you 35 minutes to do it. But eventually you'll do it. And it's like, I don't generally find that super fun. There's ways to do it well. I think like Resident Evil 7 did it decent, where there's all those doors with specific objects that require it. They had some interesting sequences and like big encounters in between those, but even that started to get a little stale for me. I'm guessing this is laid out in a similar way in a lot of the missions. I'm guessing.
And so I think some of them are very rewarding now towards them.
I think one of the things that's definitely worth pointing out, and it's made clear in here, but getting your hands on the game, you really see it, is that the kind of the delineation between the main quest puzzles and optional puzzles. And in the Giza section, I was practically tripping over tombs without realizing that there was another puzzle. Like there was a bit where I thought I was crawling into a back entrance to a main story quest, and actually, oh no, it's a whole other tomb with a different puzzle in it, which is incredibly satisfying in terms of exploration. It's always nice to find more stuff.
Or you could flip it and be like, it's confusing because I thought I was doing main story stuff and I was actually doing side stuff because it wasn't clearly delineated. There's two ways to look at it. I'm warning you now, I am an ancient Egypt snob. I am a fanboy for ancient Egypt stuff. One of my most watched channels in the last month or two, it is a channel that literally just explores like the pyramids in like crazy detail, like ridiculous levels of detail. All sorts of little bitty things you might be wondering, where it's like this one, why the summit of the Great Pyramid is missing. He goes through journal entries of various historians and people like Pliny and Diodorus describing the size of the platform when they were there. And he tracks down like to the specific year when the last few blocks, when these blocks were removed from the pyramid. Like crazy. You got that, Tism? I've wondered, like, my brother has Asperger's and stuff, and I was like, I mean, it's called a spectrum for a reason. And every once in a while I'm like, no, I don't think I'm there. And then I realize I'm watching a 45-minute deep dive on where a few blocks of stone went in the Great Pyramid, and I'm like, okay, yeah, maybe I'm a little obsessive over some things. But yeah, that's a Luke approved channel. I recommend them highly. But without a doubt, when it comes to that Egypt section, I will be watching very closely, and I will be giddy if they implement it very, very well. My standards are high because I love me some ancient Egypt stuff, just Egypt in general, and I will be enjoying that. So I'm very excited for that. I'm very excited for that bit. But let's give them one more chance to wow us with the rest of this. Deeper dive that seems like it's just a hype session.
You think around, especially with your ideas of challenge and accessibility, can optional puzzles get harder because people don't have to complete them? Do they have to be smaller because they're optional, or do you have large-scale optional puzzles that people can find? Like, how did you think about bringing both those sides together?
No, exactly what you're saying. Like, we have a substantial part of the game that is optional, especially for the open sections. If you keep your blinds on, you can go through those and just experience a third of the major content there, or even less. There's plenty of stuff to stumble on. Finding a mystery around every corner was kind of one of the things that we wanted to give you that feeling that there are things to discover if you just look, and not only small things that you say, there are big pieces of content that you wouldn't encounter unless you go off the beaten path.
Okay.
Right. And we've talked a lot about the adventure, so let's talk about the action, stealth and combat, which that's a lot of your minute-to-minute play in this game. One thing that really struck me when I was playing, and I think you kind of see an element of here, is combat initially in the early stages was a lot harder than I thought it would be. Like the melee combat and really getting your head around not being hit as much as hitting feels like a key part of that. It was a big part of your thinking here, sort of fighting smarter rather than harder in that sense, or at least until you get some of those skill book upgrades later on?
Well, it's about the character again, right? Coming back to like, what would Indy do? What would you do as Indy? So it's about setting the right expectations for the player. This is not a game where you just rush straight into a group of enemies and expect to take them down. You are not a superhero. So stealth is going to be the starting point for a lot of different scenarios in this game. But it's indie. The majority of the combat in this game is going to be hand-to-hand, using your whip and using the items around you to overcome these situations you put yourself in.
I love the items around you element as well. That idea that...
Sorry. There's such a delay with so much of their behaviors. Like, you just beat his friend over the head with a hammer, and he just kind of turns like, what? I think that's part of the reason that it just seems clunky. And maybe when you're playing it doesn't feel clunky. Because to be fair, like, with stealth stuff, there's a lot of difference between what it looks like and what it feels like. There's a big difference between those two things because it might feel responsive but look clunky. You know, one of the earliest examples I can think of is like the melee combat in The Last of Us. If you have ever played that game, there's this thing that happens when you have like a 2x4 and you hit somebody with it, where they actually have taken a number of frames on the back of that animation and cut them off so that it's just kind of like a snap right to the target, the final point of the animation when you're hitting somebody. And they did that because they found that it felt much more impactful when you're playing the game. If you skip those few frames of the animation and it slams right into them, it feels much more punchy and impactful than if you just did the smooth animation all the way through. It looks like something's kind of bugging or too sharp when you look at the footage, but once you play it, it feels way better. And maybe this is something kind of like that, where the slower response of enemies looks
I love the items
off
around you element as well. That idea that
and it plays well, but to me, it certainly looks really slow.
almost everything, or at least everything I think I came across, was a distraction or a weapon. And that kind of idea of things going wrong and just being like, well, I've got this bottle that I was going to try and distract this guy with. I might as well throw it at his face.
It ties into like another important aspect of the game, or of the IP, which is humor as well.
Yeah.
Because if you don't have humor within an Indiana Jones product, I don't think it would really feel like Indiana Jones. So it's an important beat that we've been trying to massage into throughout the entire production cycle. And we have that represented in many different aspects, obviously, in VO, in cutscenes, and, how people move and animate, but obviously also in the minute-to-minute gameplay, just to make sure that we capture that kind of, not fully slapstick, but it needs to have a sensation of humor even in the fighting. And you can hear some fantastic lines from Indy, played by Troy Baker, as he has fun remarks on the enemies going down. That's Professor to you, as he knocks them out. It's
Get ready for the banter. I'm so ready. So we'll check it out. I was optimistic that there would be some cool revelations or something in this, but it does seem like it's kind of what it seemed, which is just a corporate podcast meant to, it's basically a commercial, but it's framed as a podcast with more information. I'll be putting out my Skeptical Look video later today, so go check that on the main channel. But I basically think, Spark Notes here, my perspective is that there's a number of red flags. There's a number of problems I've seen that are conveniently quickly overlooked. Like there's the article from Mara Station that outlined how it had AI issues, they said, when translated to English. Quote, the second more serious issue is that the artificial intelligence needs significant improvement in both stealth and combat. It's noticeable that enemy behaviors require refinement, as sometimes they act erratically. And the PC Gamer preview also says it's just a fairly basic stealth game, where they say that when you do get spotted, it's rarely a mission ender. Guards seem happy to have a quick fist fight rather than running off to raise alarm, using both the simple and satisfying melee combat system. Despite their thunderous impact, your punches rarely attract wider attention, so once the guy in front of you is down, you're free to go back to the shadows. Gunfire is the only thing that'll really bring down the Reich upon you, and that's easily avoided. Your whip can snap weapons out of enemies' hands, at which point they forget they ever had one, and their lust for fisticuffs takes over. So there's not going to be any, oh no, I dropped my rifle. Because I imagine, like, let's act this out, okay? Todd. Right? I'm here. He whips the gun out of my hand. Where's the gun? I don't have a gun. I'll use a box. He whips the gun out of my hands. None of that. That's crap. That's crap. What it's going to be is, oh no, my gun. And that might feel fine in the gameplay, as long as you don't think about it. It's true, the movies, sure. But it does feel weird to have like 3 or 4 guys that have rifles aimed at you and you whip them all out and then they're like, oh no, my rifle fell. Oh well. Yeah, I feel a little weird. So there's that. They go on, as you see, but equally, I don't think there's a ton of meat here for those who do love a tense stealth experience. To support that cinematic feel, guards have been made about as intelligent as the heavy objects you frequently hit them with. And while there are elements of immersive sim, such as the alternative routes to discover, they're all light touch that keeps things from getting too slow and cerebral, bringing back thinking. But when stealth is the core experience, I do worry that the systems here are a bit too shallow to stretch across a whole game. And this is what I've noticed is I've heard nobody say the stealth is, or the enemy AI is interesting or challenges you in the stealth. Everything I've heard is that people either don't mention the AI, they don't mention the puzzle complexity or interest. They just describe the game and move past it really quickly, echoing marketing points from Microsoft. Or when they do talk about it, they have notes and they have problems. And that to me suggests that, you know, the only people thinking critically, it seems, that are willing to discuss these things come out and have frustrations and problems with it. Could be better by launch, could be improved. But when you see the IGN video, which is basically just a puff piece, like that makes me more suspicious of that coverage that's just glazing it. Because they don't mention any of the things other people have problems with. They just don't mention them at all. So maybe they notice the problems. Maybe. Time will tell. To be clear, I'm not anticipating a review code. I don't think they would send me one. If they do, I'll be pleasantly surprised. But I don't think they will. And I'm not going to pull punches or change what I think about something just to get a review code or to stay on their good side. We'll see what happens with that. I'll try the game. It's on Game Pass. Like I'll try the game. I'll let you know what I think of it. But as of right now, I think from what I'm seeing, it looks like mid, if mid were like personified into a game. Like to me, I think it's going to be solid for indie fans. I think it's going to be have probably 1 or 2 big cinematic moments. Other than that, I think 90% of the gameplay is going to be crouching behind crates and squeezing between cracks and stuff, and collecting items to use for puzzles with a lot of excessive hints. I think that that's going to be like the vast majority of the game. And I think because what I've seen of the AI and what people who have tried the game have said about it is that the AI is quite lackluster, and for a game that focuses on stealth, that's a big problem. Like that worries me. So I think it'll be interesting to see if they make improvements, but as of right now, I think it's pretty clear where I think this game is going to land. And no shocker, I think it gets that that IGN stereotypical 7 out of 10. Maybe if they give it to like Ryan McCaffrey or somebody who seems to be a big indie fan or something like that, maybe they give it like an 8, but to me right now, it seems like it's going to be in that 7 out of 10 or like C- range. So that's my guess.